right, so Holden Caulfield, right? I mean, talk about a character who still, even after all these years, gets people talking. You know, people want to know, what is it about this guy? And I get it, which is why we're doing a deep dive, going right back to the book, The Catcher in the Rye. We're really going to try to unpack why he is, well, so memorable, and maybe, just maybe, infuriating too. But that's Holden for you, right? Right away, you get that voice of his, so cynical. Seriously, by page 2, hasn't he called everyone in his life a phony? You'd think he invented the word. It's like he's built this wall and no one can quite measure up.
See, that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. That voice, cynical as it can be, what should make us wonder, is Holden what we call an unreliable narrator? He's judging everyone and everything, but maybe we are the ones who need to be doing a little judging here. We have to figure out what's really going on. I mean, think about it. If someone sees the whole world as fake, maybe it says something about them, you know? Not about everyone else. It's like when you're looking at a painting, but the artist is right there beside you, telling you exactly what you should be seeing instead of letting you just experience it.
I like that.
So it makes you wonder, does knowing that Holden might be unreliable, does that change how you see the whole story?
Absolutely. It adds this whole other layer to everything. And look, another thing about Holden, the guy cannot sit still. He's always running off from school, from some awkward encounter. Almost feels like he's trying to outrun himself. Like when he's walking on that highway in the freezing cold. And he says he feels like he's sort of disappearing. What is he running from?
It's tempting to just brush it off and say, oh, typical angsty teenager. But there's more to it, and I think a lot of it goes back to grief. Remember, Allie, Holden's little brother. Holden never really deals with that loss. He even says it himself. It takes things a while to hit me. Emotionally, he's kind of frozen. So he clings to childhood innocence because that's what he feels like he's lost.
And that's probably most obvious when you think about Jane Gallagher, right? I mean, the way he talks about her, it's like she's this mythical figure, totally pure, genuine, almost frozen in time. It's totally different from how he talks about other girls. And that little detail he remembers about how she played checkers, keeping her kings in the back row of all things. It's like, to Holden, that tiny detail, it just proves how special Jane is.
Exactly. And that's why he freaks out when Stradlater goes on a date with her. It's not just plain jealousy. It's this terror of seeing that perfect image of Jane be tarnished. Like even Jane, she's not immune to becoming, well, phony in his eyes. He's holding on to that idealized version of her because it represents everything he's lost, that childhood innocence. It explains why he can't seem to make any real connections. You know, it all goes back to that fear of losing something, of things changing.
And then there's that whole thing, maybe the most famous part of the book, Holden's thing about being the catcher in the rye. It kind of comes out of nowhere, right? This dream he has, him standing in this field of rye, and he's catching kids before they can fall off a cliff.
Yeah, it's weird, but it gets right to the heart of what's going on with Holden. He's not really talking about actually catching kids. He's talking about being afraid of growing up, you know, of losing that innocence.
Like he doesn't want them to fall into adulthood.
Exactly. The adult world, it's like he just sees it as full of phonies and disappointments.
And you almost feel bad for him because you realize he wants to protect everyone's innocence, his own, but everyone else's too.
Totally. He's mourning his own childhood, and it's like he's projecting that onto everyone else, wants to freeze time, keep everyone in that perfect little bubble.
But that's not how life works.
Nope.
And then you see this playing out in how he interacts with, well, everyone, especially other teenagers. Like, he wants to connect, but then just sabotages the whole thing. His date with Sally Hayes is a perfect example.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like he's trying so hard, but then, bam, that cynicism just comes right back.
It's painful.
He's picking apart the play, the people, even Sally.
Classic Holden.
The thing he wants most, he just pushes it away.
Like when he asks Sally to run off with him to Vermont.
Oh, yeah.
Build a cabin, live this perfect little life.
So romantic. But also, come on.
Totally unrealistic.
But you get it, you know?
Yeah.
That need for something real, something that feels genuine.
It's sad, actually. He even admits that the whole thing, running away, it wouldn't have even worked.
Does he say why?
He says, she wouldn't have been anybody to go with.
Ouch.
He just can't let himself be happy.
He can't let himself believe it would work.
Exactly.
That fear of disappointment, it's always there.
And we see this again later. Holden's wandering around Central Park. It's the middle of the night, freezing cold. And he keeps asking these cab drivers about the ducks in the lagoon.
The ducks?
Yeah, where they go in the winter when it freezes over.
It seems so random.
It does, but I don't know. I think it says a lot about where his head is at, you know?
How so?
He's surrounded by all these people in New York, but he feels totally alone.
isolated.
Yeah, and he's looking for something permanent, something that makes sense in all this chaos.
And the ducks.
I think they represent that innocence he's lost, that connection to something real, something pure.
You see right through his tough guy act in those moments.
I think we all do.
He just wants someone to understand him.
Which is why his relationship with Phoebe is so important.
Absolutely.
I mean, out of everyone, she's the only one he really lets his guard down with.
Right. She can see right through him, you know.
Yeah.
That whole phony thing, it's like she doesn't even care. She just loves him.
And you can tell how much that means to him.
Oh, absolutely.
Like when he sneaks into his parents' apartment just to see her, risks getting caught even though he just got kicked out of another school.
He needed that.
He did.
And she calls him out, too.
She does.
Remember when she asked him to name just one thing he likes?
And he can't.
Well, he can only think of Allie.
It's heartbreaking.
You realize how stuck he is.
Still so affected by Allie's death.
Yeah. And unable to really enjoy anything in the present.
And then Phoebe, being Phoebe, asks him what he wants to be.
Which leads to the whole Catcher in the Rye thing.
Right. He wants to save these kids from falling off this cliff, from becoming adults.
And again, it all circles back to that innocence, you know, that longing for a simpler time.
But it's sad too, right? Because you realize he's terrified of growing up.
Absolutely. Terrified of what that might mean.
But his story isn't all darkness and sadness. There are these moments, these glimmers of hope, like his conversation with Mr. Antolini.
Oh, yeah, his old teacher.
Yeah, it's late at night and they're talking, and you get the sense that Mr. Antolini really gets him.
He does seem to see something in Holden.
And then there's that warning about the terrible fall.
That Holden's on this path, headed for a breakdown.
Right, and it's like Mr. Antolini's trying to shake him out of it.
Give him a dose of reality.
Exactly.
And what's interesting is that Holden actually listens.
He does.
Maybe he wants to believe there's a different way.
There's that ambiguity, though, later that night, with Holden misinterpreting what Mr. Antolini does.
Yeah, it's such
makes you think about how easily things can get misunderstood.
How we see what we want to see sometimes.
But then the ending, with Phoebe on the carousel.
Oh, man.
It's raining, she's going around, and Holden's just watching her.
And for once, he's not judging.
Not running away.
Just present.
He gives you this sense of hope, you know?
Like maybe he's finally letting go.
Of the cynicism, the anger, all of it.
Finding a little bit of peace.
I love that image.
Stays with you.
It really does. And I think that's why we're still talking about Holden Caulfield all these years later. He's a mess, but
he's real.
Exactly.
He reminds us what it feels like to be young and confused and trying to find your place.
He's a reminder that it's okay to be a little messed up.
And that even in a world that feels phony, there's still beauty to be found.